The bright side of addiction is recovery, and recovery is living proof. If you're in recovery or know or love someone who is, or simply want to know more about the recovery process, or maybe you're a bit concerned about someone that you know or love, this is the podcast for you, as we carry the message of hope and the promise of recovery. And a reminder that you can find all of our podcasts at recoverycoasttocoast.org. Welcome to Recovery Coast to Coast, the national podcast. We have an amazing story today of John C., a true story of keep coming back, it works. It chronicles his struggles harmfully using alcohol and other drugs that probably should have killed him. He went through treatment a number of times. He spent 20 long years drinking and using, and he went in and out of recovery, but he kept trying. He kept coming back. Eventually, he found the gift of recovery. My amazing co-host for this edition is a dear, dear friend, Michelle Salamanca, who is a longtime friend, mother of 3 boys, and a grateful woman in long-term recovery. Here is a quick clip from today's interview.
Today, the biggest source of satisfaction for me comes from relationships that I get to have with other people. And that's something I learned early on. I probably wouldn't have stayed with AA in the beginning if someone didn't stick their hand out and make me feel welcome. And so I try to do that for other people, and I try to encourage that sort of thing with my peers. And is this increasingly widening circle of fellowship that is just, it's an experience that just never gets old.
And after Michelle and I chat with John, actor Dick Van Dyke will wrap things up with reflections on facing recovery eye to eye. I'm Neil Scott, host of Recovery Coast to Coast, with a great big thank you to you. I want to begin by expressing deep gratitude for you listening to our podcasts. I realize your time's important, and there are a lot of choices you could be making in the way of listening to podcasts. Thank you for listening to ours. Our website, recoverycoasttocoast.org, you'll find all of our podcasts there. And following 15 years of nightly broadcasting on iHeartRadio in Seattle, our podcast features interviews with everyday people in recovery, as well as clinicians, authors, and recovering celebrities who offer the promise of hope and the reality of recovery, plus well-vetted resources for individuals, families, and friends. We invite you to enjoy the podcast and to share it with your friends as well. Recovery is an American way of life. You'd like to get in touch with us? We'd love to hear from you. Our email address, recoverycoasttocoast@comcast.net. Recovery Coast to Coast is supported by Sundown M Ranch, one of America's oldest, least expensive, and most successful treatment programs. Now, not everyone who drinks alcohol becomes an alcoholic. I know that. And not every alcoholic needs treatment. In fact, many go right into the rooms, and others follow their own chosen path to recovery. But addiction is a potentially fatal disease, and more often than not, there is a need for medical intervention. Addiction is, in fact, a treatable disease. You have undoubtedly seen many of the ads on television and radio, as well as online or in social media. Many treatment centers offer so many amenities that you'd think that they were advertising a resort. But make no mistake, addiction treatment is no vacation. In most cases, it's a life-saving path to long-term recovery. Finding the best treatment for yourself or a loved one, well, frankly, that takes a lot of work. Sundown M Ranch has been successfully treating adults, adolescents, and family members since back in 1968. They are a not-for-profit program that is not in it for the money, but for the recovery of others. They keep their rates low. They treat individuals with respect, dignity, empathy, and compassion. Treatment at Sundown is abstinence-based, 12-step centered, and they have an integrated system of care that works. Now, if you find yourself looking for a treatment center, definitely do your research, but definitely consider Sundown M Ranch, located on 30 acres at the mouth of the beautiful Yakima River in Washington State. Sundown M Ranch, where recovery begins. Sundown I invite you to sit down and join me for a cup of coffee and an amazing conversation that Michelle Salamanca and I had a while ago with a guy who's in recovery, and his recovery was hard fought. A recovery odyssey, a beginning from an end. He tripped, stumbled, and fell numerous times. In fact, he spent 20 years living recklessly. From his first drink at the age of 9 and on to pot, crack cocaine, and a smorgasbord of pharmaceuticals, with 3 geographics along the way and several trips through treatment. But finally, the story has a beautiful ending. Let's meet John C. Michelle Salamanca is my co-host. Joining us in this hour is John C. He's got 2.5 years in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And John, we welcome you to the program.
Thank you.
Talk a little bit about your recovery and what's going on with you right now. You've been in recovery 2.5 years. They say it keeps getting better. Is that the case for you?
Yeah, it keeps getting richer, definitely.
You have a long history of using?
20 years, a little over 20 years.
Yeah. When did it all begin for you?
Well, I had my first drink when I was about 9 years old. I stole some beer from the fridge, some of my dad's beer from the fridge, some cigarettes, and had my first drink when I was about 9 years old, in a little town called Maytown, Washington.
You know, you say you stole beer from your parents. I saw a bus card the other day that said, "Do you know where teens get alcohol?" Right next to the milk. So I mean, pretty easy access as far as when kids use that. What did it do for you early on, John?
Well, I felt a need to kind of rebel, I guess. And in the beginning, it was just that, the beer and the cigarettes. I didn't like either one of them. Actually, I couldn't stand the taste of beer and the smoke.
But you liked what it did for you.
Yeah, I mean, in the beginning, when I first drank, there was nothing appealing about it at all, except for the idea that it was doing something bad.
And that had some appeal.
Yeah.
Were there consequences to you drinking?
Not when I was 9. Let me kind of start from the beginning. I was born in Panama City, Florida, and I lived there till I was about 4. My first memories there were of me and my sister ate a bottle of Flintstones chewables, and my mother fed my sister some Epicac, and I remember my dad. It was about 3 or 4. And I remember my dad sitting in a piece of lawn furniture, hosing the puke off of this concrete slab.
So those are some consequences to doing something, right?
Well, I didn't have to take the Epicac.
Okay.
It was my sister that paid for that one. I moved to Illinois when I was about 4, and I just remember feeling very lonely, very alone and depressed. And when I was about 8, my parents moved to Maytown, Washington, and that's where I had my first drink. I got drunk the first time when I was about 12. Me and a friend split a half a case of Budweiser and went to see Billy Graham in the Tacoma Dome.
All right.
Yeah, we were going there to look at girls. But that's the first time I felt the effect of alcohol, and I loved it. I was very shy and introverted, and alcohol kind of helped me to not think about that so much.
You were 12.
I was 12.
So how long did it go on for? Your drinking?
That was kind of an isolated incident, but I definitely liked it. And I remember I had a cousin who lived with me for a while. He told me that this weed would get me high. I'd never smoked pot before, and it was just some kind of, hay or something, and it didn't get me high at all, but I just felt like I wanted to...
Anything that was bad?
Yeah. And so when I was about 14 or 15, I started drinking in high school on weekends. That's when it really started. I would get together with some friends, and we would drink, we would smoke, and we would black out. That was the whole point. We would cut the bottom off of a 2-liter bottle of pop, fill it up with beer, throw a couple shots of Jack in it, and then beer bong it.
Wow.
And so it was blackout drinking from the get-go. And
did your parents know?
No.
Did anybody know?
I don't think they really knew. I didn't see my parents a lot.
Did you have trouble at school?
Not really. No, I didn't. My parents really didn't pay a lot of attention to what went on with me when I was in school. I failed out of school and never really heard anything about it.
Did you think that maybe failing out of school had anything to do with your drinking?
I think my drinking and depression had a lot to do with failing out of school, yeah. When I was in high school, we would drink, smoke pot, take whatever kind of pills we could get a hold of, and run around. We didn't really get in a lot of trouble. I mean, there were consequences. There were fights. Occasionally someone would die, like a car accident would happen or something.
What kind of a reaction did you get from the people in your life, your family, your friends, during all of this time?
Well, my father was quite an alcoholic himself, so...
It is a family disease, obviously.
Yeah.
Now, did he get in recovery?
He did for a while. He sobered up for about 3 years, and he worked for the State Patrol. My father actually got 3 DUIs while he was working for the State Patrol.
For the Washington State Patrol?
Yes, yeah.
Wow.
My mother never drank. I think I saw her drunk like twice, and it was usually off of a beer. But she had her own stuff going on. She was fairly neurotic.
Do you have brothers and sisters?
I had 2 sisters.
Any problem there?
Yeah, one of them is probably holed up in a meth lab right now, actually.
Really?
Yeah, the other one never really had issues with drugs or alcohol. She was epileptic, had seizures when she was young, and her mentality is probably topped out at about 17 or 18. And she's 40 this year.
Sorry to hear that, John. So you were 12, you experimented with alcohol, then you got into smoking pot, you started drinking. You said there really weren't that many consequences except somebody would die once in a while and maybe a traffic accident. Now you're in high school still, or you got dropped out?
Yeah, that was in Yelm, actually. Yelm's was a small town. There wasn't really a lot to do there but drink and party, and so periodically, there'd be a car accident, someone would die, and it happened periodically, yeah.
So what did you do from high school on? Did you get a job?
I dropped out of high school when I was 17. It was my junior year, and I think I had sophomore credits. I just started working, I probably changed jobs about every 6 months and moved around a lot, was pretty miserable. I think really it's quite possible that alcohol saved my life because I was pretty suicidal from an early age, and it helped me to get out of that.
You made suicide attempts?
I never actually took any sort of steps to end my life, but I lived very recklessly.
So you're using alcohol not for the party anymore, but actually to medicate yourself from the pain.
Yes. And I guess I was probably about 25, or my early 20s, I discovered the Grateful Dead.
Oh.
Ah.
That changed my life profoundly. I always...
A deadhead is with us tonight, folks.
I felt, I always felt very isolated and alone, and when I went to my first Dead show, me and some friends took a converted school bus and drove from Seattle down to Eugene.
A great place to see the Dead in Eugene. Great place to see the Dead, absolutely.
I probably saw about 30 shows, toured once.
Probably not a short supply of drugs down there.
No, not at all.
Did you ever hook up with the Wharf Rats?
I didn't. Not until after I got sober. During one of my brief periods of sobriety.
So now, in addition to drinking, you're using other drugs as well, obviously.
Yeah, I started using amphetamines early on. Me and my friends would take a bunch of Christmas trees and run around the Capitol campus in Olympia. And it was pretty routine for me to have a bottle of Jack in one hand and a bong in the other. We'd run around the campus. We'd run around the campus and climb on the buildings and get chased by security, get chased by the cops.
I got to stop you here for a second, just because you said we took a bunch of Christmas trees and we were running around campus. I pictured you carrying Christmas trees, John. It's
Black Beauties, Christmas trees.
You're talking about acid.
No,
PCP
those were pharmaceutical amphetamines. To the best of my knowledge, I really don't know. I didn't really care either. They made me feel good. I took them.
Obviously, we're not talking about the Christmas tree that you put up in your house.
No.
I mean, for people out there listening, they're probably thinking, what the hell is this guy doing running around the Capitol with Christmas trees?
It's not. I guess it's not as common these days to refer to different kinds of drugs by names like robin eggs or
Slang term.
Robin eggs.
Robin eggs.
What were some of the other
Black
names of some of the
Beauties, Christmas
drugs?
trees. I think that's about cross tops. Those were
Cross
those are
tops.
pretty
That's speed,
universally
right?
That's speed.
Right,
recognized, yeah.
right. Where were the consequences in all of this?
Really just a lot of misery early on. I mean, I had a lot of fun, and I didn't feel so self-conscious and fearful when I was loaded. Some of the pot that we smoked, though, I swear to God, it was worse than acid. It was harder than acid.
Yeah, pretty good
we
stuff.
had some serious
pretty wild
dank.
stuff.
Laced with something?
No, I think it was just really strong.
Yeah.
It's pretty some heavy stuff. You're smoking pot, you're using drugs, you're miserable, but yet you're using the alcohol and the drugs to medicate your pain. When did you know enough was enough?
Well, I remember distinctly driving my car down to see this girl that I was seeing, and I was having my second of two 22-ounce cans of Budweiser. At this point, I'd pretty much quit doing everything else but alcohol. It just occurred to me that the alcohol was going to be my undoing, and I was totally powerless to stop.
Did you have support from your family?
Yeah, I had support. I had this support from my employer, and I had support from my family and my friends, but I wasn't there for the right reason. I was there to try and salvage a relationship, and I didn't stay sober. I was introduced to AA there, and I learned a bit about the disease of alcoholism, the physiology, and the process.
So you're educated, and you're open to being educated about it.
Yeah, and
You just weren't ready to stop.
I read Bill's story for the first time. I didn't relate to any of it except for his take on God as initially as being a spirit of the universe, sort of a thing. I also liked the story. It was in the third edition, then Dr. Alcoholic Addict. It goes by Acceptance Was the Answer now. And I liked that a lot. I only stayed sober for about 90 days out of my first treatment center. It wasn't long before I was as bad as ever. And I remember vividly this experience of being drunk at about 7 o'clock in the morning after I had sworn I wasn't going to drink.
Was this after you got out of treatment?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
This is probably maybe 3 months out of treatment. And I was like, God, just end this. I couldn't stand it. I was miserable. And I just said, God, end this. I've heard it's said that there's two kinds of prayer. There's the prayers that people say in church, and there's the prayers that gamblers say. There's gamblers' prayers and churchgoers' prayers, and the difference between the two is that gamblers really mean it.
Good.
And I had a gambler's prayer that went something like, God, just end this. I just can't stand it anymore. And within a month of that, I was smoking crack. But I really believe that was the answer to that prayer. For me, the consequences of my alcoholism were very heavy, but if it was just that, I may still be drinking, because it hadn't gotten to the point yet where I just couldn't stand it. I was on my way there.
Well, when you went through treatment, did anything stick at all? When you got out, how long did you stay in recovery?
Well, I stayed sober for a total of about 90 days, and 30 of that was inpatient, so only about 60 days out of treatment.
How long was your run before you went and tried to get sober again?
About 2 years. And
2 more years.
So about 6 months after I got out of treatment, I smoked crack, and that started off innocently enough. If smoking crack.
Innocently enough. Were you hanging with different people? I mean, because usually when you get out of treatment, they say stick with the winners and stick around the rooms and stuff.
I didn't do that. I didn't get a sponsor. I didn't take any of the suggestions.
You still had your girlfriend?
No, I lost that. And I tell you what, the first 90 days of my sobriety, my first experience with sobriety was horrible. It was worse than the misery that I had when I was drinking.
How so, John?
I was, it's like they say, when you stop running, the freight train of reality catches up with you pretty quick, and that was my experience. I was crushed by emotions, basically. I'd never really dealt with raw emotions
Because you were always anesthetized with alcohol or
Effectively,
drugs,
yes.
yeah. And
So
that was-
at the end of 2 years, then what?
Well, during this 2 years, I started off smoking crack, and I had an experience with smoking cocaine when I was back in the 80s, I guess, when it was called freebase, and
They have a different term for it now.
yeah, you know, and it was I had enough of an experience with it at that point, and I was still a potential alcoholic that I was able to say I'm never going to touch it again, and I didn't for until the late 90s. I guess it was about it was 2000. It was about 2000. So I smoked crack, and it started off once a month thing, turned into a once a weekend thing, turned into a daily thing over about 6 months, and
were you making a lot of money at the time
I was
to buy
making
it?
a pretty fair amount of money. I was able to make five to 6 grand a month, 4 to 6 grand a month, and I spent it all on dope. So I figure over the 2 year period, I probably spent somewhere around $80,000 on coke. Eventually, I ended up in treatment for the second time.
What brought you to treatment the second time?
I'd had it.
And
Yeah,
you referred yourself? You just called up
Yeah.
and said, I want to go back?
Well, I kept missing work, and because it was getting in the way of my dope smoking. So I ended up.
Did you go back to Lakeside?
I went to Highline Recovery Center in Burien, and I ended up in my second treatment center in about September 24th of 01, is right after 9/11.
What did you think it was going to do for you? Having
Treatment?
having had your first experience, and you said it was a negative experience being sober because the freight train hit you. So what did you think the second time around was going to do for you?
You mean treatment or
Treatment.
Okay, I was completely out of control. I couldn't not use, and I figured, what I remembered about my first treatment center is that it was a safe place. There wasn't as much dope in treatment as there was on the street. And
But there was dope in treatment.
there's drugs everywhere. I've been in jail a few times too, and there's always drugs around. But
So it's a safe place, not so much as from the drugs, but from yourself then.
yeah, I had more support there, and so I actually back in July of 2001, I got a DUI. And I went deferred, and part of the deferred deal is this 2-year treatment thing, and so it was kind of my decision, and it was kind of not my decision.
Oh, now the truth comes out. First, it was you referred yourself, but really it was guided by the hands of the law.
Yeah, I still kind of had a choice. I mean, I could have just
Jail or treatment.
Well, I could have just taken the fines and pled guilty and all that.
Right. Well, now, was this your first DWI?
Yes.
But certainly not the first time you drove while intoxicated.
Oh, certainly not. No.
Yeah.
So I stayed sober for about 90 days after the second treatment. Went out for a day, stayed sober for another 90 or 100 days. Went out for a month, and then I just continually used pretty much for the whole 2-year period that I was doing my deferred. But I still managed to complete it.
Lying to your counselors, I assume.
Yeah. I lost a job. I lost a relationship. I was living hand to mouth, sleeping on surfing couches, living on the good graces of my friends.
Wearing out your welcome along the way.
Oh yeah. I did a geographical after I got evicted out of one of my apartment I lived in. I did a geographical. My first geographical, I moved to Crystal Mountain, and I ran the kitchen atop the base lodge at the at Crystal Mountain Ski Resort. And I didn't smoke any crack while I was there, but I was getting incredibly drunk. And it wasn't long before I wore out my welcome there. And I came back to Seattle and got into a clean and sober house.
Oxford House?
Actually, it's a Pioneer House, Twin Bridges.
Oh, okay, sure.
Started kind of trying to get into AA because I figured that was really my only option at that point. And
But you had been to AA before.
Yeah, but I never, I'd had all these ideas about how I was going to manage my drug use, and I hadn't exhausted all of them yet. So I ended up in Twin Bridges, and I was able to collect some unemployment at that point, So I did that for a while, and I was smoking crack in Twin Bridges, and which is a clean and sober house. But
It probably didn't go over too well.
Well, no, well, believe it or not, there was someone going door to door selling crack in that place. There's a lot of there's a lot of drug activity there. But, I did another geographical out to a friend's in Tennessee, and he was going to keep me out for crack. And that kind of worked, but I started doing a lot of pharmaceutical pain meds, which really I really had a big thing for those too. One of the things that happened leading up to my first treatment center is that I had a surgery on my left knee, and in the process was given a prescription of Percocets.
Uh-oh.
And I got 100 Percocets. It's supposed to last me a month. I took them all in about a week. And I went back and told them that someone had stolen them. I got another prescription. I took those in about a week, and that was all it took for this fog to kind of settle in. And at that point, I just didn't care about anything, and that's when I really went off the hook with the crack too. And I had this plan. This is one of my plans. I would take 4 Percocets and a 6-pack of Red Hook, and that would keep me from smoking crack, because I wouldn't be able to drive. But what ended up happening was
Wouldn't be able to stay conscious, probably.
Well, I would drive anyway, and during one of those nights of doing that, I ended up losing my car at somewhere around 3rd and Bell in a blackout, having to call a friend to come pick me up while I was running around trying to buy crack with a check. I was actually able to do it too.
Someone took a check.
Yeah. Bought crack with a check.
Oh, that's a unique one.
I actually paid.
Was the check good?
Yeah, it was good. Yeah.
Otherwise, they would have come and kicked your butt, of course, if it was not good.
Actually, bought quite a bit of dope with checks, but.
Okay, well, I just throughout your story, you go from one addiction to one drug to another. You started with alcohol. You moved into pot.
Well, I started using coke again to try and manage my blackouts, because I was getting increasingly unpredictable with alcohol, and
Were you violent at all?
I had some serious anger issues. My violence was I was violent, but usually it took a pretty extreme situation for me to get there. So it wasn't something that I just randomly acted out. I had some issues with violence. Yes.
It's kind of a merry-go-round going here, because you had the Red Hook to manage the crack cocaine use, and now you're saying you started to use coke again to manage your alcohol intoxication, right? So how did you get off the merry-go-round, John?
Well, I was fortunate in the sense I had a friend, and still have a friend, who's actually he's a little over 2 years sober now, whose brother had been in the program for several years. I think he was about 10 years at that point, or somewhere thereabout. He would come over the morning after a heavy bender or something and just kind of look at us and shake his head. And I respected the fact that he was sober. He ended up introducing me to some of the more solution-oriented AA meetings in Seattle and in the Capitol Hill area, and was one of my first sponsors. And I didn't, most of the time in the beginning, when I was going to AA meetings, I was setting up a deal on the way there and scoring dope on the way home. But and what I heard in the meetings didn't make any sense to me, really. And when I first sat with my first sponsor and started reading the book, I couldn't hear anything he said. And I could hear sounds, and I saw his lips moving, but I couldn't hear anything he said. But I respected the fact that he took the time to trying to help me. I don't know. I think over time, I started picking up little bits and pieces of it.
Over time with sobriety?
Yeah, and just even when I wasn't sober, I was picking up little bits and pieces of it.
Is it kind of like bring the body and the mind will follow?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I switched. I would do this deal. I do this 1, 2, 3 switch AA waltz thing people do, and eventually I got sick of that. After my third geographical, I'd finally kind of come to the conclusion that there wasn't any way I was going to be able to manage my use and enjoy life. And I was just sick of being miserable. I had my last drink on a plane coming back from Tennessee on April 28th of 2003. I had this plan. About a week before that, I'd managed to do somewhere in the neighborhood of about 100 milligrams of OxyContin, 100 milligrams of morphine, and drank a lot. And I think I came pretty close to checking myself out that night. And I just kind of lost the desire. I lost the drive to get loaded. I didn't stop drinking for another week, but I tell you what, if you need a new experience with Bill's story, try reading it after you're smoking crack. That's a different experience with Bill's story.
Reading the big book while smoking crack.
Yeah,
well, that's different. I have to give you that.
Hey, you were talking about solution-orientated meetings. So, as opposed to what other kind of meetings are there? What does solution-orientated mean?
Solution-oriented, for me, I mean, the first meetings that I went to were like extended therapy sessions at the treatment centers, and then after that, there were I went to first step halls where really people just kind of, at that point, it seemed to me that people kind of talked more about how much their life sucked, you know, and solution-oriented meetings, to me, what that means is where you get into the work and start using the steps to recover.
The 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous?
Yeah, and about a week after I got sober, after my last drink, I was wanting to get loaded. I don't know how I stayed sober that first week. I just did, and I had an experience. I had a friend call me who was he said he was thinking about checking out. And what that basically meant is he's thinking about killing himself. And I've known this guy for a long time. I ended up babysitting him for about 3 days, taking him to 3 to 5 meetings a day, getting him hooked up with some people who had some substantial quality sobriety, and into a treatment center. And that experience was my first experience with feeling useful. I never really felt useful in a meaningful way before. That was a new kind of a buzz for me, and it electrified my enthusiasm for doing the steps, for working my way through the program. And so I got a sponsor, and I did it. I did the steps. I did an inventory. I did steps 1 through 3. I got on my knees in a coffee shop with my sponsor, who's a heavily tattooed man with an afro, and we held hands and got on our knees and did the 3rd step in a coffee shop, did inventory, did my 5th step, and I went through the steps.
You faced all those fears that you were running from, that freight train that you were so scared of. You got to face, and you came through.
I came to realize that none of that stuff was as big a deal as I thought it was. Today, the biggest source of satisfaction for me comes from relationships that I get to have with other people. And that's something I learned early on. I probably wouldn't have stayed with AA in the beginning if someone didn't stick their hand out and make me feel welcome. And so I try to do that for other people, and I try to encourage that sort of thing with my peers. And is this increasingly widening circle of fellowship that is just, it's an experience that just never gets old.
How many meetings a week do you go to now, John?
I've gone to just about a meeting a day since I got sober. Yeah, there are periods where I don't go to meetings for a couple of maybe 2 or 3 days, but I go to more than one meeting a day enough times to make up for that.
Where do you go all over town, different meetings? You have a home group?
Yes, I do. I try to stick with meetings that are solution oriented. I go to a lot of different kinds of meetings though, and they serve different purposes for me. Some of them are more where I feel more compelled to kind of carry the message, and other ones are meetings where I'm more there to kind of try and receive. I sponsor others. I try to do with them what was done with me. I'm certain that I benefit more from that experience than anybody else that could benefit from me. I have a relationship with my higher power, and which I choose to call God. I go to church. I go to the Center for Spiritual Living, which is kind of a Unitarian, non-denominational sort of a spiritual learning
How
center.
has that impacted your recovery?
Well, I explained it like this to a friend of mine. AA, and I love AA. I loved bad acid too, but AA was kind of like, it could be kind of like bad acid compared.
No, wait, hold on a second here. AA is like bad acid.
Well,
I haven't heard that analogy before.
The bad acid kind of has side effects. Like, it gives you shivers and chills, and the come down is foggy, and the
Right.
good acid's all buzz, right? What I get from this church that I go to is all buzz. It's not that there's not as much sickness. Don't get me wrong. I loved the bad acid too, and I need AA. I go to this church because I can, but I need AA.
Do you ever
And
have the compulsion to use or drink again 2.5 years out?
No, I don't. I'll have a fleeting thought about alcohol, but they're usually brief and not. They don't have any power the way that they used to.
Were there any triggers early on for you in recovery that set you off?
Breathing.
Breathing.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, if I had money in my pocket, that was tough. And I used to live in parts of town where I had to go through areas that I'd done a lot of. I had a lot of history, and that was a challenge in the beginning.
How'd you take care of yourself? How'd you get through those times?
I would break it down. I would break it down into minutes. I would do things like say I'm not gonna use until I get to my apartment. I'd say I'm not gonna use until I go to bed. I just would break it down, and I would get on the phone and talk to people. That's something that I had to take to early on was using the phone.
reaching out to other
Yes.
people. Was that difficult at first for you?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I want to ask anybody for help.
Is there something that you want to share with anybody who's listening that might have had the experiences of using and drinking that you have and maybe need some help?
Yeah, I believe today that I am sober by the grace of God. I get to have that grace because I pray for it, and because I've worked the steps. I've done some work towards removing the things that have blocked me from God and from my fellows, and so I'm able to have a life that doesn't make me so miserable that I need to medicate myself.
And that relationship you have with your higher power or your God that you speak of, how did you come about that? That was in the regards of the steps?
It's through prayer, mostly through prayer. I pray a lot, and my prayers have changed a lot over time, and they've gotten
From, oh, God, help me?
yeah, and sometimes it's still just that. Sometimes it's God just help, but mostly what I pray for now is for God to reveal His will for me and to give me the strength and the courage to pursue that.
Your story has a lot of information about acceptance and humility, I think, what I read into it. So how important was humility?
Humility never really. I don't know. I don't think I've ever really been an egomaniac, but in order to take some suggestions, it's definitely necessary to be humble
And to pick up the phone, you have to be humble and
to get some humility. You can get humility a couple different ways. You can learn it through humiliation, or you can I've got it. I still go back and forth too. I lose it and I get it back. And
What has been the most significant thing that's happened to you in recovery?
well, the most significant thing is that I've been reunited with people that I loved when I was using, and who are now sober. And I have an experience with love that I never imagined. I have relationships now that I never dreamed I could have, and so the most significant experience is just being able to feel a part of life and to participate in life.
And what about people in your life? Who has been significant to you in your recovery?
Well, these two ladies in this room right now.
Yeah.
There's a couple people listening right now. I have a buddy, Jim, who's been a friend of mine for about 18 years. He's got a little over 2 years sober now. And I have a friend, Corey, who may or may not be listening. He's the guy who called up and said he was going to check out. And another friend named Bob. And he's got some time in the program, and there's just too many. There are people that have had relationships that have they've been mentors at times.
What about the people in your using life that you surf their couches? Are you still in contact with any of them?
Yeah, well, Jim's one of them.
Oh, okay.
His brother was the one who sponsored me in the beginning too. His brother Brian.
Mm-hmm.
There's a couple of friends that are still out there that I really hope someday will make it in, and I really hope that I can stay sober. It's not a guaranteed deal.
Just for today.
Yeah, exactly.
And certainly in living in the solution and working the 12 steps, there's a lot of work that comes with that. It's, they say sobriety is not for sissies. I mean, there is a lot of work. How was it for you in terms of making amends?
I've had a couple of powerful experiences with amends. As far as the work part goes, I got up at 6 o'clock this morning, and I've got to be up at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. And I haven't really, and I stopped for about an hour or so since then. So it's I have a full life. I had an experience with an amends. I was getting ready to do an amends after this breakup that went really horrible. This girl I was dating ended up hooking up with one of my best friends, and we're all in the program, and so I didn't sleep for like 3 days, and I had arranged to do this amends, and I couldn't sleep, so I decided to do it. I didn't sleep or eat for like 3 days, and I decided to get up and prepare for this amends. And in the process, I started going through these emails and that I'd kept for a couple of years, and I watched where I'd gotten from where I was on the beam trying to pursue God's will in my life to being totally in self-will and totally miserable. And by preparing for this amends, it was revealed to me that I was very much in self-will and causing harm for me and others.
Sober.
Yeah.
This
but
is in sobriety.
These are all learning lessons that you've learned in recovery.
Yeah, and they never stop. That's not something that, I talk to people who've got 20 years and they're having experiences that aren't.
It is indeed a process.
Yes.
And John, I appreciate you coming by tonight and sharing your experience, strength, and hope with us. And we invite you to come back again sometime. Do it one more time. Michelle, thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Neil.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed that conversation with John C., who finally, after 20 years of misery and pain, found his way into long-term recovery, one day at a time. And special thanks to my co-host, Michelle Salamanca, a recovery rock star. By the way, I want to remind listeners of this podcast that if you would like to tell your story of recovery, regardless of the path that you've chosen, and as long as you've been in continuous recovery for a year or more, drop us a note at recoverycoasttocoast@comcast.net. Actor Dick Van Dyke will offer his thoughts on recovery, eye to eye. We'll do that in just 30 seconds.
She has always been your baby, but when your daughter got into drugs and alcohol, she turned into a stranger. What do you do? Where do you turn? Contact Sundown M Ranch. Sundown's nationally recognized youth treatment program guides young people back to a life free of drugs and alcohol. All treatment is gender-specific and directed by caring certified professionals in a safe environment. You can get your daughter back and get to know her again. Go to www.sundown.org to learn more.
As promised, here's a guy in long-term recovery, great actor and a great guy, Dick Van Dyke.
Never bend your head. Always hold it high. Look the world straight in the face. Helen Keller. As a teenager, I was extremely self-conscious. When I recall those years, I can still feel the emotional pain I endured. One of the most difficult challenges for me was talking face-to-face with other people. I tried hard to sidestep such confrontations, and when they were unavoidable, I sought refuge in various mannerisms and techniques that I thought were uniquely mine. By staring at a person's forehead, ears, or chin, for example, I could escape eye contact. By performing rituals in lighting and smoking cigarettes, or by faked coughing fits, I could lessen the intensity of my fear and my discomfort. One of the most uplifting aspects of my early recovery was discovering that I was hardly unique in my painful self-consciousness. What a relief to be able to laugh along with others who had developed similar techniques to avoid eye contact. And what a bonus to be able to talk about my low self-esteem and fear of people, and to benefit from others' similar stories. When I stopped trying to hide from people, my self-consciousness gradually diminished. Slowly but surely, my sense of self-worth has risen. Today, one of the most valued freedoms I have is being able to easily and fearlessly talk with other people. and to look them squarely in the eye when I do. Thought for today: the best cure for terminal uniqueness is to see yourself in another.
Well, that wraps up this edition of the national podcast, Recovery Coast to Coast. If you've enjoyed our podcast, please share it with others. You can do that by social media or simply telling someone about it. You can find all of our podcasts at recoverycoasttocoast.org. Also, please hit the subscribe or follow button. It's free, and you'll be notified the next time we publish a podcast. Remember, if you know someone who's experiencing problems with alcohol or any other drug, here is a 24-hour national helpline. It offers free information and confidential treatment referrals. Spanish-speaking individuals are available as well. The number is 1-800-622-HELP. And join us next time for America's Voice for Recovery, Recovery Coast to Coast, the national podcast. And another shout out to our sponsoring organization, Sundown M Ranch, where recovery begins. Sundown.org. Thanks to John C. for his experience, strength, and hope, and for my co-host, Michelle Salamanca, as well. I'm Neil Scott, reminding you to stay healthy, live in gratitude, and be kind to others. Remember, the bright side of addiction is recovery. Pass it on.